Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate Meet Me There, which is our monthly intergenerational poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction experience curated by transgender queer poet and sound artist Samuel Ace. This series features writers exploring genre and gender boundaries. We are really excited to have two featured poets, co-featured poets tonight, Daisy Atterbury and Farid Matuk. And I'm going to introduce our host poet first. Samuel Ace is the curator of this space and has done an incredible job. I'm always amazed at the people that we get to have in our space because of Sam, and I'm really grateful. If you don't know, you can go back and watch our archive of Meet Me There events on our YouTube channel, which is Charis, just / Charis Circle. So Sam is, as I said, an amazing writer and sound artist. His latest books are I Want to Start by Saying, Our Weather, Our Sea, and Meet Me There, Normal Sex, and Home in 3 Days Don't Wash. He's a recipient of the Australia Lesbian Writer Award and the Firecracker Alternative Book Award in Poetry, as well as a repeat finalist for both the Lambda Literary Award and the National Poetry Series. Recent work can be found in Personal Best, Makers on Their Poems That Matter Most, Essential Queer Voices of U.S. Poetry, Fence, Bathhouse, The Texas Review, Poetry, We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetry, Best American Experimental Poetry, and many other journals and anthologies. I'm going to also just introduce you to our other poets, and then Sam is going to give a more warm intro, but I'll give the professional bios of both of these amazing folks. So Daisy Atterbury is a poet, essayist, and scholar. The Kármán Line, which came out last year in October, is a St. Lawrence Book Award finalist and a debut book of experimental prose and poetry. It came out from Rescue Press. Described as a new cosmology and a cerebral altar to the desert, the Kármán Line investigates queer life and fantasies of space and place with an interest in unraveling colonial narratives in the American Southwest. Atterbury holds a full-time lectureship in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program and Department of American Studies at the University of New Mexico, and recently curated the Living Room series for poetry at the Center for Contemporary Arts, Santa Fe. So welcome, Daisy. We're really glad you're here. And welcome, Farid Matuk. Farid is the author of the poetry collections This Is a Nice Neighborhood, The Real Horse, and Moon Mirrored Indivisible, with visual artist Nancy Friedman Sanchez. Matuk created the book arts project Redolent, recipient of the 2023 Anna Rabinowitz Prize from the Poetry Society of America. Matuk's work has been supported by residencies from the Headland Center for the Arts, a visiting Holloway lectureship in the practice of poetry at the University of California, Berkeley, and a 2024 USA Fellowship from United States Artists. A previously undocumented child of Syrian and Peruvian parents, an inheritor of lineages marked by colonial and gendered violence, and a survivor of childhood sexual assault, Farid Matuk approaches the musical capacities of verse not as mere excitation or decoration, but as forms that reclaim pleasure and presence. Entering the sonic constellations of Moon Mirrored Indivisible, the reader finds relief from nesting layers of containment that systems of power impose on our bodies and imaginations. So I can't wait for this discussion. I'm going to kick it over to Sam to more fully welcome you all. But thanks to everybody watching at home. We really appreciate you. And there will be an opportunity for a little bit. So thanks to you all for being with us. And welcome, Sam.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, ER. So just always a pleasure to work and be with Charis Books. And just happy to be here and welcome Farid and Daisy. I'm really excited for this reading. As ER said, Meet Me There is this monthly reading series, mostly features work by queer and trans authors who are bringing new books and creative energy into the world. Also want to thank tonight Abeo, who has recently joined the Charis team as the new programming assistant and has been already extremely helpful. I think many of you know. Welcome also to everybody in on Crowdcast who's not zooming in, crowdcasting in, whatever you're here. November, Charis Books celebrated its 50th anniversary, which, as we know, is almost unheard of in for an independent bookstore. So I really want to see them exist for the next 50 years. So if there are and any of you have not yet purchased books of tonight's authors or any other author, please go to the Charis website and do that purchase to support them. Also, check the Charis website for current events. They have an event going on almost every night, and almost all of them are live streamed, even if they're in person. And you won't be disappointed. So I'm going to talk about both of these authors' new books at the same time. I'm not going to interrupt the reading to introduce each one of them. So just a little context. Back in the 2000s, I spent a great deal of time in a little town called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. My partner at the time and I opened a storefront gallery on Main Street to host community events and readings to show collaborative projects as well as my own visual and photographic work. We hosted the first and perhaps the only trans and genderqueer talk in that town, which featured my Tucson artist friend Ray Strazo's photographic work. The storefront was packed for that event and attracted a large cross-section of that town. I bring this up because I was brought back to that time in reading Daisy Atterbury's The Kármán Line, where the author passes through TRC, as the locals call it, on their journey to Spaceport America. As the road trip unfurls, Atterbury excavates both interior and external landscapes. The yearning for an unreachable lover, loss, land desecration, nuclear waste with its current and future repercussions, and the physical emptiness of the spaceport itself, a mostly failed capitalistic venture, which Atterbury says, quote, like most capitalistic dreams, it's given us a place to sell postcards. Or later in the book, quote, if I had to describe a spaceport, I'd say it's a wishing well. All are devastatingly explored in the book. In the form of letters to a beloved, perhaps lost, perhaps unreachable, we find heartbreak and human desire slotted against a backdrop of conquest, state boundaries, broken treaties, both on the earth and potentially in space. The so-called emptiness encountered along the way is ahistorical, silence heaped upon silence layered atop real histories, lives, culture, and the knowledge of a land. Which also brings me to Farid Matuk's Moon-Mirrored Indivisible, his gorgeous new book of poems, which has yet to be released, but will be released in the next couple of days into the world. Matuk, always a close reader of his own and others' poems, says in an essay published along with one of the poems in the new book, The Moon in Cancer, quote, I don't know who to face on the issue of Syrian, Spanish, colonial, and Andean indigenous lineages that never held on to stories, much less to a sense of people. Displacements, colonization, assimilation, silences are my materials. I don't know how to stand like some Charles Olson or Denise Levertov in an imagined public square to convene my people by addressing them. Neither can I turn my back on my external and internalized oppressor and speak in the quiet air of my beloveds, though I'd very much like to. My dislocation isn't a coin to trade for sympathy or authority. It's simply a fact, and it both limits and empowers my poems. I believe in the real because poems can't be made of anything else. I'm so moved by that. Thank you, Farid, for describing your work that way. As deeply sonorous and sensual these poems are, they're also brutally honest with the expressive self, seeming to turn back on and into themselves in an effort to examine what they choose to say and see. Perhaps this is the mirror in the title, the self at once singular, then doubled or tripled or more, but at the same time indivisible. Throughout the book, Matuk reveals where they as a poet stand and where they do not, writing in spite of what I understand to be a singular position. Instead, there appears to be a bi or pansexual life force running throughout the book. In that aforementioned essay, Farid quotes Audre Lorde and James Baldwin saying, quote, both Lorde and Baldwin understood that to cultivate the sensory is to swerve around and under desiccated ghoul costumes of color, end quote, that would drape us in legible forms so we can be counted and managed. In the poems, language and meaning fold themselves into a refracted cross stitch where desire, gender, gendered and state violence, and yes, the moon and all of its implacable beauty exist at once. During my time in Truth or Consequences, a town named after a game show, which Daisy talks about in their book, but also a town and a name that continues to reveal in its history of poverty, indigenous massacre, floods, and much, much more, i.e., the truth and consequences of colonialism and capital. In the mid 2000s, there was an uprising in the town triggered by local Christian groups who wanted to ban so called pornography, which they defined as any book or visual material that spoke about or showed a naked body or even the draped indication of nakedness. They were using a blueprint distributed to many small towns by large right-wing organizations to use zoning ordinances to go after books, gay people, and artists. The word tumescence actually appeared in the proposed zoning ordinance that would have required bookstores to hide books with any mention of sex or body parts behind a partition, posted with age restrictions and warnings about pornography. Among other restrictions, the ordinance would have also completely banned life drawing classes. The town meetings during that time devolved into shouting matches between various factions, artists on one side, churchgoers on the other, with several community comments equating Michelangelo's art with images in Playboy magazine and pornography. During that zoning law fight, the ACLU appeared before the TRC City Commission to school its members on the First Amendment, and although it got close, the proposed law never passed. I mention this because so much of what happened in that town and others in the mid 2000s is happening again now on a much greater scale, and has been a continuous through line in the history of this country. The outcome of that fight in New Mexico almost 20 years ago gives me hope for where we are now, but only a bit. But to hear Atterbury and Matuk who both continue to write with a complex honesty, strengthens my hope, and I can only thank them. So we will first hear from Farid Matuk, reading from his new book, and then Daisy Atterbury.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you as well to Charis Books for hosting us. I want to acknowledge first all the ways that our threads kind of weave. Many, many, many years ago, my partner and I courted each other by reading Sam's Home in 3 Days to one another, long before I ever dreamed of meeting Sam. Sam has been a good friend to me, I'm lucky to say, for more than 10 years, a friend to many poets. And Daisy, I got to meet several years ago at a conference and felt immediate intellectual and just general kinship. So I'm so happy and heartened to be able to celebrate these books with you all. So thank you. I'm going to begin from reading from Moon Mirrored Indivisible with a note at the back. This is the book. I'm showing it because it's brand new in my hands. This is a note that just gives entry into the first poem I'll read. Under torture in U.S. custody, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed confessed to orchestrating the videotape beheading of U.S. journalist Daniel Pearl in Pakistan in 2002. The so-called Islamic State followed with its own videotape beheadings in 2014 to 2015, including that of US journalist James Foley. Researcher Sue Tate identified a shift occurring during the height of the Second Gulf War around 2005, in which the website ogrish.com went from being a niche for gore to being a purveyor of newsworthy and moralistic video content, feeding legacy news organizations in the US and the UK. So I'll begin with two kind of quieter poems I don't share very often, but I'd like to air them out. This one is called Before That, the question that many migrants and displaced people get. No, but where were you born before that? I want to talk to you about happiness to stay inside it. But boys displaced by proxy war are falling onto gravel outside my window under the police helicopter's searchlight. The gravel bites through to the knees. The searchlight is a thing the bars on my window are promised to. And the wisdom of the body, like articulations of capital through time, means some things, but not others. The greatest good in feeling, say, or how shedding to a news video of a beheading loosens my jaw. Nature compels cleanliness. I could aspire to be professional, sitting on the toilet and working a little snot, dry and fine, tensile for new figuring like I'm the god who knows Mercury shifts shape, not category. Offal, organic, decorative, maybe those are stages of consequence. Tended, the snot worked thin as a pencil mustache invites the strangeness of a decorated face, which blended with certain American things like shitting without a video is boring. But where were you born before that? Free radicals, the Tikkun Collective, for one, at a click past Imperium, turn back to describe Imperium's outlines, but not their own posed facial stunts. A thing being a position and its grimacing. I mean, I can clear the sass of saying, quote, ultimately it's the omnipresence of the new police that has made the war undetectable, with a laughter in a closed set of my laughters, each coded to an aspect and color and digital charm in the pocket. Watching this one, I'm learning to thicken the line between inner and outer cop, to follow a desert's turns, toward the sun in its shielding waxes on leaves and with its needles, but where were you born before that? Forgive me for being so dumb, with this booger mustache so dark, having carried a little blood at the start. I guess if you're taken for a man, the old way was to say whatever other men had said, only louder, so that even dead, you'd be seen. In the distance, your words mark and redeem. Happy among the released. So tutored, so iterated, I might think any consoling magic could be an actual turn. The night sky behaves itself as ordinance withheld, so that boys married to their own white father would lie in bed hardly saying prepossessed. Prepossessed. I thought that wrote cheers at the passenger gate for each next fighter jet touching the borrowed runway meant that there's a trace of the state inside any moment, wanting to be approached, with a balanced point of intention and reception lucid dreamers must have. The thread as shared feeling, through gelatin in the eye, lights hollows, an alibi. But now that the sun in the scene is setting as in Los Angeles, long thin band of orange between purple plains, it's more as if only a thought ago we'd been carefree under the vastest of honesties. I'll read from the last section in the book. The Magnificat is Mary's hymn of praise, I think, in the Gospel of Luke, in which she is said to magnify the Lord through her verbal praise and through bearing the fetus of the Christ. Magnificat mirror petition. As a mirror fears the scene but travels in them, I look for eyes fierce enough to move a love into me as far as Mother Mary's Magnificat would teach me to carry a man's world the other way out. But he has filled the hungry with good things. Say this poem already slanders and begs, sucks teeth and claps loud as it carries us through the yard to the pool. All I see is dust and trees, an idea of death or the ghost of owning strung through rain, soft in the motion sensor light. And I'm sorry, because I'm happy I filter the smaller waters through, piling them into words that petition for a little elegance, for my ass to bend to the wind coming off the pool water, so that when I stand in a long line of filled bodies. What we bear is the horse burned in Pennsylvania. White boys poured accelerant on its back and neck and set the match to no allegory, all matter, no longer a plane of flights, a plane of movement, a plane of kinetic aptitude, of kinetic feeling. Put the pity there to stand in for those who think they're magnified enough to lope outside the reflection, not born free, but released. The ghost of the horse on fire is the slowest thing making its own physics that comes with its own laws. Be thou gentle, refined in bearing. Arts and Craft is a longer poem, and I'll close with a very short poem. So those are the last two pieces. The word mask comes up early in this poem, I think. Yeah, and it's M-A-S-C, as in masculinity. Arts and Craft. I know what I'm going to do next, and I know what I'm going to trace. Stone moon, broken ship, and the cloud that's landing. If my mother was the femme in our story, raising me with her sister, the butch, then whoso frees whatever mask they want from men is already king. But I'll torch my energetic sadness pouring up, burn the air between body and country like the mosquito in its fancy stripes, trying to bite through my jeans. The doves have been so angry and horny in their cups, or in the sky's domed cup of the season. Around this house with friends who are saying goodnight from faces that have already been free and leaving, taking corners slowly, greasy skids, going down to the same ditch of solace, like our kid said, petitioning her way into our bed. I just want to lie here like a number, meaning the many and the shape, seen from above when we're going with the animals in the transiting black air. Hummingbirds all over this early June aren't war gods just because they startle my instruments. Extending only so far into the layered resin darkness, the park dogs howl in, to call nearer ghosts who look for a sudden give in our future, like playing at our daughter's pretend deathbed this morning. He wanted me to be a theater, resounding last words of advice. We glued flakes from the pearlescent edge of the nautilus shell to imagine all the folds and surface strain of a sail, triangling forth the arc she outlined to take her. In the story, my mother worked for a military dictatorship's Ministry of Health, a sisterhood of clerks, amid how handsome the officers. And when she chose to have me, I was born or let go as she screamed her mother's name, bursting the thinnest capillaries purple about her neck, that screaming, to touch air without breath at the edges of the words along which any point is creation, holds a path that doubles back to what home? The river can be a border or the reason for a city, a place for mass burials in the first days of a coup. We drink the Euphrates, the Mapocho, in a thirst that tracks to no writ, no guarantee of a systemic critique when everything, and a people, need critiques by many and many an elegant hand. When the fascists need to get silly off themselves, no pretending. They parade in boats. They dance at the rally to whatever's playing. They tighten their faces. Everyone knows the truth all the time. It's beautiful like that, abiding, immovable, common. Adi says that Darwish said, no people are smaller than their poem. Say it again. When they come to ask, rigor, value, coinage, mouthfuls heavy enough to think we're actually here. My child's fitful, hard words in her sleep, the quiet that follows the state's circling plains, long avenues and different drugs to meet the moment, not yet dangerous or disposable enough to kill or disappear. Revolution finds a way, Tango says. You guys are negative, Jane says, through wind chimes tuned to the golden ratio. We should go. Into a slight band of teal in the sky, light the trash fire and palm fronds under the new form serpent wending down to bring air onto earth, stars onto my eyes, strung to my belly lines, the gifts, the rain in rivers given to real estate for graves. Gold fingers, gold breastplate, as sure as I wear my grandmother's cross, I drop the amulet. Healed, black air turning somewhere in a cave. Pisces wheeling through dreams' black water. While Venus goes to my mother Taurus, let the bull eat good grass, drink wet water. Frame my favorite photograph of her. Such a document says itself, plus an effluence of time waving us back along geometries that adorned the old vessels with the shapes of the rooms we'll come to pour out of. I've been a child surrounded. I've been a fiction talking, a state flower signaling a monstrance filled by everyone more than a man, casting shadows at my eastern wall in the work of adding one another in time. I see an actual cricket turned gray, clung to the corner's web in its deathful leaving, and still my daughter declares that I teach her nothing is real. Not knowing how to look for her, I thought the picture held an eye to see with, but it's a whole head ringing. We send her away with ideas. We take a walk, thick with our finery, seeing all the hill grass blown north. And she asks, why are you so angry? Pretender gods, gods of leaving. Everything runs ahead. A story promises that I'll catch up. But a voice that's stretching into the word, so warm, not asking for anything, drafts above mother of the sanitation plant, mother of the second queen, mother of the trees the new hive will visit on their way. as quantity, extension, inhalation of the fabric that folds love inside and outside at once, along a transference between atomic poles that's transgenerational because it got here. Onto the page where I try to write about my grandmother's first pregnancy. She was an Aleppo daughter ordered from a bride book. Bringing the wrong language to the Andes, her new stepkids took her first stillborn by the heel, far from her Arabic, auntie. I heard the story as a child, not told to me, but strung up in the air around me. That distance, from her body to her fetus, my friends tell me, would be called masafa in Arabic. But she might say it's bood, a whole dimension, where both the story and the state break a little. Dicks are just more of the porous surface on the folding river running tense, enough for anyone to walk on. Or soft, releasing the dead from their shapes. They come near, inside, an increase that wants to turn out more accountable than each other's healers or comrades. To train a love for whoever in their gesture and trace would help us make of poems a resonance not lonely or owned, opening at each heel's step to sense one another having gone before, practicing how to vacate detachment and still, rightly unwelcomed in the words. I pronounce whatever comes my conviction. I know that the horse, wading in to soak, holds me in the dream water by letting me see it. I know that when I fill with breath enough to float and fold into those already here, every inch of altitude surprises, falling into the mirror the sky is. And I'll close with this brief poem. Reese. I know everyone wanted their stupid church high on a hill, but my favorite things, happy things that I thought drifting down into sleep in all the day's faces that afflict, that lo, I could be the paper their words ravish or remember, and the end of their script. But if the actual horse on fire and its event out of these words fallen and gathered back through love, trying not to be with but of, fold into petals around the trace of that touch. I'll be of a people who concentrate on sex and sense and artifice like that. To crease closer the outside's infinite regress so that dying, actual dying, only brings us into the next fold about a flower thrown after a life unafraid, no smaller than our poem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farid. It was just beautiful, and beautiful to hear those poems off the page in your voice. Now, Daisy Atterbury.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reading. That was incredible. I loved hearing you read. And thank you so much, Sam, for those really generous introductions and for speaking about your time in TRC. So much more to say. So I'm going to read from I'll show my book, The Kármán Line, which came out this winter, and the book I'll talk about in a minute, and then I also wanted to read just a little bit of new work that is picking up where the Kármán Line leaves off in a way. So this short piece, and then I'll dive into the book, is called Psychogeography of the Desert. It was dark. The creature crept toward the bunker. All was dim. Dust in the air prevented the creature from seeing the placard. The creature could barely make out the insignia on the front of the placard. Does it make sense to speak of the creature's present as our future? To the creature, the present was the present, and we were irrelevant to the creature. Before the creature's time, the southwestern US was already constructed by layered histories, resisting mapability. Like the desert, which Samia Heni says, quote, stands in for a complex locus of imageries, imaginaries, climates, landscapes, spaces, and histories. The creature's surround, now and then, was narrated by national discourses of the American West. The creature's surround was produced through spatial imaginaries that maintained dominant national histories, all forgotten. As Heni writes, the territories of both hot and cold deserts embody various forms of anthropogenic exploitation, such as colonial dispossession, resource extraction, and civil and military occupation, which was all true at one time. Also true is the observation that among the most common platitudes about the desert are ideas that deserts are empty. Then, those military-industrial restructurings of the desert were justified by the desert's imagined emptiness. Now, the desert's psychogeographic landscape could be described according to the experiences of the creature. The desert still wasn't empty. Despite the dust obfuscating its main source of sunlight, the creature was there. To speak of the creature was to speak of a life force produced in and through what were once nuclear colonial regimes. The creature was created in the imaginary of the very scientists who made the creature necessary. Because the scientists needed to invent the creature needed to exist. It may be important to note that the creature didn't know about the scientists. The creature didn't know how they buried transuranic waste in the waste isolation pilot program near what was once called Carlsbad, New Mexico, nor how they mapped out transportation schemas to carefully transport radioactive detritus from the nuclear labs up north to the salt caves down south. Nor did the creature know that, anticipating the existence of the creature, the scientists hired linguists to produce pictograms to depict the radioactivity of the site for future humans. The creature didn't know about the scientists. By the time of the creature, the scientists were dead. And that's the beginning of this newer work. And also want to read a little bit from the Kármán Line. The title refers to a mathematical calculation by Austrian scientist who is known to have calculated the official boundary between the Earth and space. And so this is the end of the vertical end of national boundaries and the beginning of what's called free space. So it starts with two epigraphs. Stars arrive non-visually first. Meme Bersenbrugge. A blue orbit suggested by echoes. Tommy Pico. The Kármán Line. They say no love deserves the death it has. Fuck. I see about the loss of you before we even begin. I've never been satisfied with the imagined end. She said, this class discussion is the best so far. However, sex is an inhibiting topic. what it means to deplane. The Kármán Line is the altitude at which the Earth's atmosphere ends and outer space begins. The Kármán Line is the edge of space, as opposed to near space, the high altitude region of the atmosphere. When they say altitude, they're thinking in terms of the human, what is measurable from the ground. Beyond the Kármán Line, the Earth's atmosphere is too thin to support an object in flight. A plane at that height would have to travel faster than orbital velocity to remain in the air. Space begins as determined by math and the practicality of actually being somewhere. Knowledge of space can be a non-reciprocal relationship. Known means something enters into a relationship with someone or something else. Even if the recipient, the known, does not enter into the relationship with something like willingness. Even if the recipient, the known, whether person or thing, is unaware, does not know. I know the taste of grammar in my mouth, lack, address, and space is populated and unknown. At first it's an inch, then it's a couple inches, then it's a couple feet. She will reach the Kármán Line. It's lonely up here at the shell of the earth, and cold. Zones of avoidance. I read the headline that astronomers have recently discovered a vast assemblage of galaxies hidden behind our own in what they call the zone of avoidance. I ignore an astronomer who super likes me on Tinder. Beyond the Milky Way, a galactic wall. I wonder if she's picked up that I love the stars in a moody, non-scientific way. I wonder if I'm scared someone will reduce my life to math. If I fear I'll meet my match and will exist in the world computationally, compositionally. There's a vast wall along the southern border of the local cosmos. I do, in fact, want to know about this with my body. The thousands of new galaxies are described in the New York Times using Earth metaphors, like beehives of trillions of stars and dark worlds, and a curtain arcing across at least 700 million light years of space. I press my hands to my eyes, the better to see bees bursting, exploding bees taking a bow, the man behind the curtain naked in genderless stardust drapes. Is the language of science a zone of contagion, where metaphor bleeds into metaphor, because reality is so far outside the language we've reserved for it, we almost glitch? I attach some sanctity of thinking to our exchanges, because I think you've taught me how to think. I've aligned thinking with some excruciating ecstasy of relation possible only through this exchange and thus confined to it, a thinking provoked and then possessed by another in service of a togetherness. When my possession ends, there is another form it takes, I think, which is thinking corroded by pain and loss. It's probably that thought as narrative produces some chemical release that has me doubled over the toilet seeing stars. People talk about radical softness. Hard elements become the catastrophic aftermath of the merger of dense cores of stars left after star death. The Mohs hardness scales gradation ranges from talc to diamond, the between occupied by gems like topaz, apatite, and fluorite, hydrogen, helium, and lithium. The universe's three lightest elements were created earliest in the birth of the cosmos, while heavier elements were forged billions of years later in the dense cores of stars. I try to describe contact past my galaxy's zone of avoidance, a place I find myself with nothing to lose, and every bone in my body healed like a hardened jewel. I build my language with rocks. Hardness is a spectrum. I linger with the idea of an aesthetics of gleaming, which is not to say not chaos. It's a place where thought is disordered, where there are fresh sheets. Some larger majority of the investigations go unanswered, someone writes in the app. Instigations, she corrects. I don't think I answer. Parts for the whole. Declarative sentences say they're straight, but make out in locker rooms. If synecdoche takes the parts for the whole, sails for a ship or threads for clothes, metonymy uses a thing to refer to another thing. A crown for a king, a suit for a man. I'm tired. The autonomous system dysregulates whether or not I speak. The language for what I need folds in me like a dead thing. I sit down to write about synecdoche, but I instead receive a text containing a photograph of a bare chest. Think about my chest. What's the word when parts don't represent whole? Say organ doesn't represent gender, a transcorporal poetics, or a rhetoric of elimination, a hook in a pop song, bop, bop, bop. I reply, nice. I think about sending out a selfie of my chest with 2 holes in the middle, cut for the hole, slit for a top. There's a thing about writing to heal the body in slices, word a promissory note feeding the wildfire of feeling in the morning, then stilled on a cursor, slice. Everyone wants something I promised. More pics? You talk about a story. Mine drips slowly from my ears. It's the feeling of liquid in the wrong hole, the way I fantasize about a space hub in a desire to permeate, but I forget we're not talking. Sometimes I think these things do matter, whom I've loved, who I talk to, where I see myself in 5 years. Then I wake up and understand that culture is adjunct to the world, that it lives and dies in the present, that the archive is a mode of governance against memory, a fantasy construction of an unknowable past. Things to remain are volcanoes, hydrogen, a little river, a little salt. I read a feelings wheel and try to name mine. Sweaty, but all I see is mad, sad, glad, bad. Just feel sweaty. I rub my chest with oils and soaps and perfumes. I get touched up. Negativity is not exactly a downer, just the inverse of something. Maybe a suit, maybe a crown for a king. I have about 2 more. The erotics of a hand rolling up and down jeans rhythmically, caught in a breath. I feel terse today. My paycheck feels like single ply. I email a person late. I keep idioms for memos, keep a drawer, keep lists of luxuries, little pleasures, walnuts and sauce, the loud fan of work at night. Not today, she said, hung over from sound beating on the brow. We want it all so relatable that yes, I wanted, filling the living room or shopping at Smith's, the way void isn't absent of yearning, the way frozen food holds potential. the way paranoid thoughts might still substantiate. They said, "Come align yourself with splinters. Come be inlaid. My irritant, my pain in the ass, life, my bad, brief stint of lingering outside your driveway, wanting you in a wig, wanting you on stilts in someone else's automatic drive truck, or on your porch in a different season, a little colder, a little wetter, a little unlike whatever's been good for me." I look up wanting for mid 1600s in most early languages, including Norse. I'm not without withouts, but not without bearings. Not entirely sure why, in the context of water, dripped all over my floor in the mornings, drinking coffee, dripping. I'm pressing a space bar, dripping this winter long and full of capital S secrets, little bows over silences, hot poppers in a driveway all to myself, things that, if spoken, would mire us all in action. I'm trying to write about this thing, can't access the feeling, might need to be pushed, bound, hit, moved, left, lost. I want more grace, you said, coming off another partial diagnosis. I want more art, but I want it at no expense. I walk in parallel to the people on the street. They say they see things in this city I don't, hope in what they call tech. They have the desire to wear white gloves, produce some other place. In their calculus, they seek some unsettlement for themselves, which appears the opposite of settlement, but you reap what you sow. I admire, bridled with other wishes. I'm in line at the state fair. I stay here loudly, waiting for my dessert. And then I want to read one last poem that is the epigraph, or the epilogue, epigraphs and epilogues to start and end of this book. And then I'll turn it back over to Sam. Thank you all for being here. This is called Orbital Economy. In 1768, the Captain James Cook sailed towards the Pacific islands of Tahiti and Australia. And if I had to describe a spaceport, I'd say it's a wishing well. I'd guess at your departure. A spaceport is a transit site of cashmere white granite bathrooms with a line. Then you leave the Earth. There's a debate as to the exact colonial contrivance that caused the Captain James Cook to sail his bottomless. Some scholars say it was the desire to observe the transit of Venus across the face of the sun. Was it the transit of Venus threaded that white hot granite with desire for mastery of the thing? Look, the dry ocean bed has stories it could tell in 100,000 years out of order. The ship was called the good ship Endeavour, intended to find a southern continent mapping space. I have seen your locked lips and come home sweating. I write on my wall to see if you'll notice. Waiting in interstitial spaces in the story, I said, a slice of blue is a dawn in any distance. I can feel the rain holding me in a captivity I truly wanted in this house to read and think. It's a rainy day fund we're using here, but we're starting to develop a poetics of, and did you want to join me for dinner? Back channeling, did you want to pay for this now? our assembly of the dissimilar. Now, a grave at the poetry project I read, effaced from her meek brow all lines of sickness, grief, and care, what we left as we moved across the sky. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. So good to hear you read that work. Beautiful, just beautiful. We do reserve time at the end for some discussion, a conversation. We don't have a huge amount of time, not a lot. First, I want to say thank you again to the audience, and if any of you have any questions for the authors, please put them in the chat. Also, there's a little green button down at the bottom of your screen by the book Poets Books from Charis. You just click on that and you'll go directly to their work. Also, Farid and Daisy are welcome to ask each other anything you would like. So we'll take, it's close to an hour, we'll take maybe 5-7 minutes to talk on, unless there's any questions from the audience, which I'm not sure, I don't think I see. I'll start us out for both of you. This beautiful, beautiful reading. I had a couple questions, but then I wrote down a new one as I was hearing you, both in different ways, cross-reference in the same poem or section, a very detailed present with something either from memory, something happening in history or the world. I mean, a commentary seems the stuff of poetry and what poetry does so well, but I wonder in your writing process and in your thoughts, how you think about that mesh of the present with so much more.
Go ahead, Daisy.
You're muted, Daisy, I think. No? Can't hear you. Yes, there you go.
Hello. Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't speak on mute the whole time. I guess but I appreciate that question a lot. And I had an experience. Someone that I don't know like wrote something about the book that I just wrote, um, and it was a really nice review. It was interesting to see someone else's words, but they were sort of taken aback by like the barrage of detail, and we're like oversaturated by the history and references in this way that I felt like that to be like an accurate description of how the present is like concocted in the Kármán Line, and I think that sort of helped me understand that there's a way, I think for me, of having grown up in Santa Fe, in a place that has like layers of history that are sort of. Can you hear me? Okay. My mic just went out. Okay. That like the experience of being in this place is like very oversaturating with detail and knowledge about the past that makes up the present, and that like that history is ongoing and lived in the moment, and it's like revealed around every corner, in emblems on buildings and in sites and in bumper stickers, and there's like an ongoing constant, consistent narration of the present according to like the entirety of human history that's been experienced there. And it's a violent history, and it has beauty to it as well. And so um, I I think that entirely informed my own writing style, and I sort of forget that like maybe it can feel like a barrage um, and a saturation. But I entirely attribute that to place.
Mm. Love that. I didn't feel that it was over. Yeah.
But I also, there was a line that Farid read, the river can be a border or a reason for a city, which I feel like exemplifies a similar attention to like the multiplicity of detail of like purpose for places and entities, that the ways that like you captured that like uh, something natural could also like signify something of cartography, like, and those exist at the same time. Felt like to me like a familiar way of understanding the world, and like a kinship that I just like loved hearing that line and seeing it in your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And logistics. Because the next line is something about, or a place for mass burials in the first days of a coup, right? So there are people who are thinking in really layered and complex ways about how to use force. And in order to carry out that thinking, they have to layer the present moment with all kinds of possibility and symbology. So there's that. I also want to say, just hearing you read, that the moments of sensory detail were not at all a barrage. They were like this beautiful pin that would hold me down in the gentlest way in what is otherwise a billowing kind of just discourse. And I mean billowing in intentional, not as random billowing. I guess the other thing is that the present moment, when I leave my house, is constantly impressed upon, or there are forces who are trying to articulate what the present moment should or should not mean. So I think all the way back to the 90s when I was a high school student, and boys at my school started wearing t-shirts with American flags that said "Try to burn this one." It was during the invasion of Kuwait and such, that era. And so that's, you're walking through the school with your lunch bag or whatever, and that's a present moment of quotidian illness, relatively speaking, and then this messaging of the state and of belonging is also being projected at the same time off of someone's t-shirt. And that's just one tiny example of how we're constantly, I think, as Daisy said, narrating, right? Or we're constantly trying to frame, or we're constantly trying to mark. Yeah, there's a lot more we could say, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt it, Farid, and they're almost like little portals, like the snot on the toilet, or the, bringing in your daughter, waking you up, that then launch into these much larger moments of history, and then come back. And you, Daisy, that new piece too, just framing it all around the creature, that so much else is revealed. That kind of detail, I think, is so amazingly vivid and effective in even in putting into perspective everything else that's being said. everything.
I wanted to ask about the creature, Daisy, if you could talk about what draws you to that figure and
Mhm.
yeah, just
Um, I haven't read. This is just the really beginning of hearing this piece out loud to understand what it's doing. But
mm,
I was there's a there's a moment in that piece that like contains its origins, and it's this pictograph drawing that is a real prompt that was asked of artists to try to somehow create a warning like symbol for future humans to like warn against the burial of nuclear waste in New Mexico. And so
mm,
there's this radioactive waste, and it will be dangerous for millions of years. And um, there's this problem of how to convey that to a people that exist beyond language or past the point of our own knowing and recognition. And I wanted to inhabit that space.
Mhm.
So, and that creature, I don't
so
know
cool.
about
Yeah.
it. I'm like learning what it is, um, and I'm trying to write myself out of it somehow and uh, remove a human perspective. But it's a really challenging uh, piece of work for me right now, and I'm enjoying it. But it's just something I'm discovering as it goes. Yeah.
Oh,
I love it.
Thanks for asking about it,
love it.
though. Appreciate that.
Well, I have much more to ask, but we are at the end of our time. Um, just want to thank everyone for coming, and especially you, Daisy, and Farid, for being here tonight. Thanks, everyone. And you two could stick around for a minute after we close up. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all.
Brilliant.